Hello and welcome. I'm Adam Zimman. I'm the VP of Platform at LaunchDarkly, and I'm here to give you a talk about the difference between building a team versus building a feature. I think that we can all agree that software powers the world. This is something that we see in our everyday experiences, where every experience that we have these days includes some aspect of software. And when you think about it, developers are the ones who build your software. So you want to be thoughtful about how you're building a team and how you're hiring developers that are going to help you scale as you add more features, more functionality, or even just start extending your service out to more people. One of the things that we think about, when we talk about scaling, is this comes back from a technical perspective to Amdahl's law. This is kind of the theoretical equation when we started thinking about how we could look at parallel processing, and we wanted to be able to understand how we could optimize running different processes in a parallel capacity. Now, one of the things that Amdahl's law talks about is this limitation that you run into where there are certain aspects of any process that you're trying to go through that need to be serial. There are things that happen, and therefore there's going to be a limit to how much you can actually reduce or increase the efficiency of your throughput. Now, the interesting point about this is that as we started to build highly parallelized systems, there was a gentleman by the name of Neil Gunther who actually extended Amdahl's law to this notion of a universal scalability law. And he noticed that something really interesting as we moved past just parallel processing to the world of distributed services or multi-service type processes that needed to run through and connect to multiple machines or multiple servers. And one of the key aspects that changed was Amdahl's law gave you this notion that your throughput would potentially slow. So you wouldn't get true linear throughput as you linearly grew your services or grew your threads. The interesting aspect of the universal scalability law is that Gunther actually showed that you can actually end up getting a not only decrease rate of return, but you can actually get diminished returns. So this is the idea that you could actually be in a situation where if you scale in the wrong way, you could actually generate negative work. You get less done. And so this is something that I find is extraordinarily compelling in the context of building teams, because lo and behold, people are not as efficient as machines. And so this is something that is extraordinarily important to recognize when you're thinking about how you're going to build and scale your team. You need to make sure that you hire the right developers. Now, what do I mean by the right developers? Well, teams, as a whole, are built with every hire. And that may mean that one hire may not have the same needs as the next hire. Ultimately, what you want is you want this notion where every single hire that you make combines into a greater whole, right? You want Voltron. What you need to be careful about is ending up with just cats in space, because two very different things. Right? You don't want to end up in a situation where you've hired a bunch of people that are exactly the same, and one of those side effects can oftentimes be that they get frustrated with each other and disagree because they don't have that ability to be able to work together across difference. So this idea of difference, oftentimes we talk about this in the notion of diversity. I am a true believer that diversity actually builds better teams and builds better products. This is what I've seen. This is what I truly believe in my heart of hearts. And so when you think about the existing role that you have, if every single role you approach, you look to hire the same profile, the same type of person, the impact on that as you scale is you end up with an extraordinarily homogeneous team that all looks the same, that all thinks the same, that will always come up with the same solutions to the questions that are being asked. And you don't get any benefit of being able to think outside the box. The other thing that you oftentimes run into when you're thinking about who you solicit or who you're asking for in your job descriptions is you really want to be specific with what you're asking for. You should really ask for what you need. The last time I checked, there are very few software organizations that actually need a ninja to write code for them. However, I'm sure that you've all seen that notion of, we need the ninja developer or we need the 10x developer. The reality is you don't. That's not actually what you need. What you need is very specific to your organization. You may need explicit languages. You may need explicit, services knowledge. You may need the ability for someone that has experience with a certain type of customer persona, right? These are all very explicit asks that you can tie to someone's experience or someone's know-how. The other thing that I can guarantee you about is that any one 10x developer, the only benefit you will get is creating 9 times as much work for every other developer on the team. This is truly the notion that you need to be thoughtful about how the team is going to work together, because any gains that you get from a single individual that is incapable of working across the team is going to be quickly negated because of those interactions that are difficult. And this is where you start to think about the culture that you're actually going to be creating, because culture is what drives your diversity. Now, a good friend of mine liked to talk a lot about this notion of focusing on building a great culture as opposed to waiting for culture to happen to you. So my friend, her name is Jocelyn Goldfein. She wrote a great blog post that I highly recommend taking a look at and reading through. I've linked it here in the presentation, which will be made available afterwards. But culture is a very simple equation. It's the behaviors that you reward, taking away the behaviors that you punish, results in your culture, right? This isn't complicated, but it is something that you need to be thoughtful about as you think about what are those behaviors that you actually want to reward? What are those behaviors that maybe you don't want to reward? One key example or one great example of this is this notion of hero behavior, right? This is the idea of someone that, swoops in at the last minute. Maybe there's some, bad release that goes out and they stay up all night working on a fix and then get it out the door. And you make them into the hero because they saved the day, they, made customers able to get back online, whatever it was. The challenge with rewarding that type of behavior is that you will quickly find, as your company scales, more and more instances where all of a sudden there is the need for someone to save the day. And that's because they start to recognize, individuals, humans, start to look at those behaviors that are rewarded and look for opportunities for those behaviors to come about. So they actually start to create urgency or create fire drills. And so if you instead look at the ability to reward people for a release that goes unnoticed, suddenly that starts to be the behavior that you see more and more often. So I'd encourage you to think about not only, what are the things that you, punish because, they are very obvious that, you don't want that type of behavior, whether it's harassment or, exclusion, things of that are very obvious to, I think, all of us that that's not how the work environment that we want to be in. I'd offer that you may want to extend, the, kind of context of what you're rewarding to be more specific around the types of behaviors that you want to see perpetuated. A big part of this actually comes into the notion of interview culture, right? How you interview folks and how you actually bring outsiders into your space as an organization is extraordinarily important in how you welcome them or how you actually expect them to assimilate into your culture. The most impactful way that I can articulate this is something that was shared with me years ago. And this is the notion that the job description, where you capture those responsibilities that an individual is going to be expected to deliver upon, this should be a mirror reflection of what that person is then assessed against for their performance review. It doesn't really matter which side you start from, right? You can start from the notion of creating a rubric around performance reviews and how you're going to measure an individual's performance in a certain role, being able to outline, these are the things that you're looking for. This is what, great looks like. This is what good looks like. This is like what poor looks like. But ultimately, you want to take those same metrics that you're planning to use to assess someone and use those to define what their responsibilities are of the job. This gives you this great ability to be able to have this upfront conversation of what the expectations are and make sure that there's clarity between the individual that you're looking to hire, as well as the manager who's going to be responsible for helping that person be successful. So with regards to that notion of employee success, the other thing that you want to think about is, are you creating a career ladder where you help people rise up and move to the next level? Or are you actually just creating a revolving door, right? This is something that is very commonly talked about in the context of diversity. This is, where the idea of, inclusion comes in, of being able to make sure that people that look different from you, that may be different from a background perspective than yourself as a manager, as a leader, are still being afforded the opportunity to succeed and still have clarity and lack of bias around their ability to be successful. You should start to think about this notion of inclusion and this notion of enablement from the very beginning, right? You should be sourcing for individuals that are going to be good fits, that have experience that is commensurate with what you actually need in the role. So, looking for things like where someone went to college may not be all that relevant for their ability to produce code, right? But looking at, hey, has someone worked in the languages that we've worked in? That might be more indicative of whether or not, they're going to be successful to hit the ground running. When you start doing recruiting and you're actually outbounding to individuals, you should be looking at hiring folks that you feel are going to be successful in the role because of the experience that they've had, not just because you know them from your social circles. When you onboard folks, you need to be thoughtful about how are you bringing them in? Are you enabling them with the tools they need? Are you giving them the training they need? Are you giving them the kind of follow-up to make sure that they're actually moving in the right direction, right? Have you given them like a 30, 60, 90-day roadmap of what they should expect and what they should be doing as they're onboarding? And that doesn't stop, right? You need to make sure that they're growing. You need to make sure that they're continuing to grow in their skills, continuing to grow in their responsibilities. And then the final thing that I just want to touch on briefly, and this could be an entire conversation or discussion in itself, is the notion of when someone leaves your organization. I think that, oftentimes this is a very, complicated topic, but it's something that I would highly recommend that you consider in your employee lifecycle, that starts all the way from that, initial sourcing, that has to include when someone leaves. And, whether you consider that termination or offboarding, I like to think of it as alumni. And the reason that I use the word alumni is that I want to think about that offboarding experience as something where there is mutual understanding of why it's come to that point, right? This shouldn't ever be a surprise to someone. And ultimately what you want to do, and I acknowledge that it's not always a possibility, but you want to do your best to be human about it and to try to create a experience where when someone leaves your company for whatever the reason, that there isn't animosity towards your company, and that you have provided that individual the opportunity to be successful, and it was just a mismatch of what they were looking for and what you needed. Now, getting back to the notion of the interview itself, one of the things that I try to stress to any manager that is setting up an interview process and trying to define what they're asking for and what they're looking for is that you should think about what you do from an average day of work, right? Very few folks I know actually write code at a whiteboard, right? That's just not how we write code. And so if you're assessing someone's ability to write code, you should be looking at creating a homework assignment that actually gives them the ability to write code on their computer with the access to the internet, because guess what? That's what developers do. Developers look for ways to solve problems, and giving them the tools that you would give them when they're actually doing their job, if you were to bring them on board, is a far more appropriate way to interview someone than this expectation that they're going to be able to hold everything that they need to know in their head. So with this, I want to encourage you to think about this notion that teams, like features, are never done. So really, you need to think about building your teams similar to the way that you think about building your product, right? You want to have this notion of, you want to build your team with a vision and with a roadmap in mind, right? You don't want to just think about those tactical immediate hires You want to think about the long term. You want to think about how are you actually incrementally moving towards a larger goal. And this gives you the ability to make sure that those individual decisions are going to be more thoughtful. So with that, I want to say thank you very much. I really appreciated being able to present to you today. And I look forward to any questions that you might have, and hope you have a wonderful day.